Ah, thank you very much, Professor Luisa Rodriguez, for that wonderful introduction. And also thank you, Dr. Madhu Kelkar. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully I will get it right. Not always good at this. Okay. Um, if the volume is not clear, if I'm speaking too fast, please let me know. I would like to thank the Mumbai Research Centre of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai and the Ramnarayan Ruia Autonomous College, Matunga, for inviting me to give the keynote address for the online research methodology course on Mumbai, Trailing the City. I particularly want to thank Professor Luisa Rodriguez, Dr. Madhu Kelkar, and Dr. Shehnaz Nalwala for all their organizational efforts. This is such an exciting course. I'm really just so happy to hear that there's such a fabulous response, a really large response to it. And I wish I could have done a course like this when I started my work on Bombay or Mumbai. And looking at the list of distinguished speakers, course topics, and activities, I know I would still benefit from it. I hope many of you taking this course will go on to research, write, explore, preserve, and showcase the city in many ways. I look forward to learning from you in the future. Cities arouse so many different passions within us. Whether you love, hate, or have mixed feelings about Mumbai, I hope you will leave the course with an even greater appreciation for it. I find that Bombay or Mumbai always humbles me. The more I learn, the less I feel I know about it, but there's so much to learn about it. It's constantly fascinating. Perhaps some or many of you will find ways to make it a better city, not only as a physical entity, but as a place that allows all its citizens to thrive. Today, I will consider the history of Bombay as seen through the lens of one building, the Bombay Town Hall. In the first half of my talk, I will examine the period from the building's inception in 1811 to 1918. In the second half of my talk, I will explore the building's context from independence, especially the period since the 1980s, and not exactly till the current period, but maybe about 10, 15 years before the current period. Scholars from a variety of disciplines and with diverse approaches have focused on particular spaces or buildings in a city. What can the focus on a specific building or space tell us about a city and its society? Before turning to Bombay's Town Hall, I want to briefly give a few examples for your reference of this kind of scholarship, the focus on a particular building or space as a method for telling us something about a city. The geographer David Harvey's article, Monument and Myth, which was published all the way ago in 1979, is about the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur, constructed between 1875 to 1919, that crowns the Paris's northern skyline and shows us how it came to be and what it means. It's a powerful essay about a dominant structure in Paris, its site, and the political, revolutionary, religious, monarchical, and other forces that brought it into being. I was recently in Paris, and I suddenly recalled that I had read an article on this structure and this building, not the most beautiful building which is very much visited by a lot of tourists, just dominates the skyline, and the history is really fascinating. So one building can tell us a lot about the city. I also think that this might be the place where Feroz Gandhi proposed to Indira Gandhi, and she accepted, but don't take my word for it. Another excellent example of such scholarship is the art historian Wu Hang's book, Remaking Beijing, Tiananmen Square and the Creation of a Political Space. It was published in 2005. And as might be obvious from the title, the space of Tiananmen Square is the focus of this book. This is also a great study, and you just, I mean, you will just get amazed to think that like one space can be looked at in so many different angles and tell you so much about the remaking of Beijing. A third example comes from Shanghai. Shanghai has long been associated with cosmopolitan culture. The city was famously one of the 5 treaty ports established by the British in China at the conclusion of the Opium War in 1842. And since the 1990s, economic reforms helped to make it the commercial capital of and largest city in mainland China. Steadily rising in World City ranking, Shanghai's transformation has made it a model to be emulated in other parts of the world. For example, in October 2004, India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh advocated the use of Shanghai as a model to make over Mumbai. However, as author G. Lee observes, quote, since the 1990s, the commercial glamour of Shanghai nostalgia flourished at the expense of the real lives of ordinary citizens, end quote, turning away from the allure of the city's, end quote, commercial glamour, end quote. An important attempt at foregrounding the rich texture of everyday lives in the city is seen in G. Lee's Shanghai Homes, Palimpsests of Private Life, where the author focuses on the lives of ordinary residents in 2 Shanghai alleyways, and particularly on her grandparents' home, where she spent several years of her childhood. One of the alleyways was torn down in 2006, and the second was to be pulled down in 2014. Thus, this is also a window into a world that no longer exists. I now turn to Bombay's town hall. Okay, great. Part 1, the functions of Bombay's town hall. What is a town hall? When I started examining Bombay's town hall, I never thought of its function. Perhaps town hall is the best name for a building that should serve the public of the town or city of Bombay, which since 1995 is officially known as Mumbai. However, as this talk unfolds, I hope to show that in its history and varied uses, this is not a town hall might suit as well for the caption of the image of this building. In fact, today, the building bears the name of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai on its facade. The town hall is one of the most notable buildings in Bombay from the colonial period. This Greek revival building was designed by the military architect Colonel Thomas Cowper and completed in 1833. Prominently located in the heart of the historic Fort District, the building demands attention with its wide flight of steps that dramatically rises above the raised basement. These steps reach the main portico on the first floor, where solid fluted Greek Doric columns stand majestically as they hold up an entablature. Today, the building houses the Asiatic Society and its library, as it has done since the building's inception, hosts lectures and conferences, and unless there have been recent changes, its large hall works as a public reading room. The contemporary functions of Bombay's town hall raise various questions about its function, construction, and reception among the public during the colonial era. The town hall in colonial Bombay shared some continuity with the institution in Britain, yet its function and meaning was inflected by the local context and colonial rule, such that the government of the Bombay Presidency, rather than the town of Bombay, controlled part of the building. During the course of the town hall's history, the building was also used for the governance of the Bombay Presidency, not simply the town of Bombay. The town hall was begun at the behest of the British residents of Bombay and completed by the government to fulfill a variety of needs and uses. However, even as the government completed the building, there was a shift in the use of its public spaces, from the reservation of assembly rooms for the exclusive use of British inhabitants to utilization of the central hall and the bar room by the public, including the native public, at the discretion of the government. The European practice of reserving assembly rooms for the use of elite inhabitants originated in the late Middle Ages, when there was oligarchic control of town halls. The British brought this long-standing European practice with them to India. Before we can understand Bombay's town hall, we first have to explore what the institution of the town hall meant in colonial Bombay. Thus, we have to examine the town hall's varied functions and highlight the qualities of its public spaces and points of access. For example, by focusing on the controversy in 1871 over the placement of the statue of Jagannath Shankar Sheth, 1802 to 1865, a leading member of the native elite in the town hall, I will demonstrate the specificities of the public that made claims to Bombay's town hall as a public space. Even though the public was invoked by native elites in making arguments in favor of the placement of Shankar Sheth's statue in the town hall, it was really a battle for the inclusion of native elites into the ruling oligarchy of British elites who controlled the town hall. The town hall is thus a central arena in the history of bourgeois public space in India. The building that was completed in 1833, that is the building that you see to your left, was not the first structure to serve as Bombay's town hall. Previous buildings that housed the functions of the town hall were originally built for other purposes. As early as 1675, a rented house where judicial courts were housed also functioned as a town hall, right? So the town hall also was in a building with the judicial courts. In short, an institution known as a town hall that was linked to courts of justice existed in Bombay since the 17th century. While the functions of this institution remain sketchy, it represents the control of the state, in this case, the East India Company, rather than a place of local self-government. So the history of this town hall began in a public meeting held by the British inhabitants of Bombay in 1811, where a committee was appointed to raise funds and make arrangements for the construction of a town hall. At this initial stage, the town hall had three functions. First, to house the literary, later the Bombay Royal Asiatic Society's library and museum. Second, to provide a suitable setting for the location of statues of eminent men. Third, to furnish a suite of public assembly and supper rooms. And these were, of course, for the European inhabitants of the town, especially the elite inhabitants. The colonial town hall that was thus conceived of in 1811, both as a building and institution, was decoupled from judicial courts, and unlike town halls and civic halls in England in the 16th and 17th centuries, was never regarded as, quote, the seat of autonomous civic administration, end quote. So these multiple uses and occupancy had something to do with the pattern of funding. In 1823, after having spent about 1.75 lakhs on the building, the Town Hall Committee found that it lacked funds to complete the structure, right? So they couldn't finish it. So then they offered this unfinished building to the government to be completed by them and utilized for purposes of the state, while reserving the assembly and supper rooms rent-free for the use of British inhabitants. In November 1824, both the government of Bombay and the Court of Directors of the East India Company considered the matter. Subsequently, the government spent almost 5 lakhs to complete the building. In other words, the government contributed roughly 3/4 of the cost of the building and the Town Hall Committee 1/4, not including the cost of the land which belonged to the government. The Bombay branch of the Royal Asiatic Society contributed rupees 10,000 for the town hall, in return for which it received rooms in the north wing of the building, quote, reserved for it and fitted up by the government, end quote. It sounds like actually quite a good deal. The government's contribution to the construction of Bombay's town hall changed the meaning of the institution before the completion of its construction by stipulating that some government offices and storerooms be located here, adding a 4th function, right? So to the 3 functions, this is now a 4th function. Of greatest significance was the government's decision to allow the use of the hall for public purposes with government approval, which was the hall's 5th function. This opened up the use of the town hall to a broader public, including the native public, making it no longer largely an exclusive space for the town's elite British inhabitants. So this is a really big deal. So the town hall then became a middle ground for the holding of public meetings permitted by government, including meetings organized jointly by members of both the British and native communities. It was an important venue and training ground for sections, particularly elite male sections of Bombay's citizenry, in public modes of communication with the government of the presidency, by asking permission to hold a meeting for a particular purpose, through petitions signed at meetings, reports of assemblies published in newspapers about its grievances or support of government, and through leadership and forms of assembly that were accepted by the government, right? So the kinds of activities were here were often in modes that the government found acceptable. And so in a way, it was like a good training ground for European elites, but also for native elites, for sure. So the town hall then was one of the institutions through which the government established its hegemony. At the same time, it was an important social space for Bombay's elite British inhabitants to hold balls, banquets, and felicitate officials. Even as the town hall gave the city's local citizenry, European and Indian, a space to voice opinion, the contained spaces of the town hall and the hegemonic norms of correct procedure and decorum followed here in public meetings, spatially framed, bounded, and limited dissent. Part 2. The qualities of the public spaces of Bombay's town hall. An analysis of Bombay's town hall reveals them to be public in varying degrees. The German philosopher Jürgen Habermas observed that we tend to, quote, call events and occasions public when they are open to all, right? We think of public, we're all the public, and so if something is open to all, that's when we think of it as public. And this is in contrast to closed or exclusive affairs, end quote. However, this may not always be the case, as the term public building does not indicate that the building is open to the public, right? So even though we assume that a public building is open to the public, it doesn't really mean that. In actuality, according to Habermas, quote, public buildings simply house state institutions and as such are public. The state is the public authority. It owes this attribute to its task of promoting the public or common welfare of its rightful members, end quote. The town hall offered multiple points of access, revealing a desire to make the building accessible to the public and gesturing to the diverse ways in which this building would have been approached and experienced. The floor plans of the town hall in the images are based on plans drawn in 1885. The plans reveal a building that could be easily divided into 3 parts, each with its own entrance. The wide steps led to the main entrance, behind which was the central hall. And if you look at the lower plan, the main public space, which was flanked by wings on the north and south. Additional entries to these wings from the ground floor were through porticos on the building's return walls, perpendicular to the axis of the main entrance, as well as through doors located at 2 porticos on either side of the main entrance. Compared to the building's impressive main entrance, these access points were understated. The town hall is an impressive building, and it is likely that many members of Bombay's public felt as James Baldwin did in 1963 when he reflected on his first sight of New York. So I'm going to quote from James Baldwin. This is what he says, quote, "I still remember my first sight of New York. It was really another city when I was born, where I was born." And James Baldwin is an African-American, was an African-American writer. "We looked down over the Park Avenue streetcar tracks. It was Park Avenue, but I didn't know what Park Avenue meant downtown. The Park Avenue I grew up on, which is still standing, is dark and dirty. No one would dream of opening up a Tiffany's on that Park Avenue. And when you go downtown, you discover you are literally in the white world. It is rich, or at least it looks rich. It is clean because they collect garbage downtown. There are doormen. People walk about as though they owned where they are, and indeed they do. You know instinctively that none of this is for you. You know this before you are told. And who is it for? And who is paying for it? And why isn't it for you?" End quote. I'm quoting from James Baldwin because it's the sense which many of us may feel, that there are parts where even though we can enter, we don't belong, that it's not for us. We can feel intimidated by a building like the town hall. It could be a 5-star hotel. It could be an impressive shop. It could be certain kinds of institutions. We can feel like this belongs to a different world from where I belong, and this is not for me, but it's a world that belongs to something else. And so I'm talking about this idea of the public and this feeling that that it's possible, and I don't know for sure, but it's possible that the town hall at some point was intimidating to many people, and that even many public buildings, even though people might have a right to it, people might feel that they don't have a right to it, to either public buildings or certain spaces, depending on their race, their class, gender, all kinds of factors. In Bombay, the South Fort area was predominantly for Europeans, while wealthy Indians largely inhabited the North Fort in the 19th century. So this was an area dominated by the respectable classes. So even with the multiple points of access, one has to wonder whether large numbers of Bombay's public also looked at the town hall and instinctively knew without being told, like Baldwin, that none of this is for you. The spaces of Bombay's town hall were public in varying degrees. At the heart of the building on the first floor, the lower plan, was the transverse central hall divided by a double row of Corinthian columns. Beyond the eastern or inner row of columns in the central hall was a room which led to the elliptical-shaped Darbar room. Thus, the central hall and the Darbar room were the most public as spaces where public meetings were held with the government's permission, but presumably could also be occasionally reserved for a specific public, the British inhabitants. Certainly until 1882, the sequence that led to and including the Darbar room itself formed the main public space of the building. The first floor of the north wing, which is to your left in the plan, was occupied by the Royal Asiatic Society, but we are less clear about how some of the other rooms in the town hall were meant to be experienced. Apart from the Darbar room and the entry to it, the use to which the south wing on the first floor was put is not specified in the records. By contrast, the rooms of the Asiatic Society were consistently reserved for its members or reserved for a specific public. Yet the lobby entrance to the Asiatic Society, where the statues were housed, was a public area. However, through its location and furnishings could indicate that it was a public space with a preferred public. Government offices and storerooms were housed in the basement or ground floor, but also in other locations. There was probably limited public access to certain areas and not others. Sculptures of eminent worthies were located in some public spaces that gave even more meaning to the space. The locations of many statues are marked in the plan of the first floor in 1885. You see this in the lower left on the screen. And you see the statues on the left and to the right. Between the northernmost columns of the central hall was placed a statue of Mountstuart Elphinstone, governor of Bombay, 1819 to 1827. Elphinstone played a central role in the consolidation of the Bombay presidency. Also marked is the statue of Sir Charles Forbes, the head of Forbes and Company, and the first English firm to be established in Bombay in 1767, which stood in the well of the southern staircase. Yet it was a space around the elliptical staircase of the northern wing, which was the real repository of memorial statues. Through the portico on the north side, which is to your left in the plan, one passed through a circular hall to enter a vestibule from where one moved up by a staircase. On reaching the first floor, along the center of the northern wall, was a huge statue of the first native baronet, Sir Jamshedji Jijibai, in Parsi dress and in a position that you see to your left, right? So you can see that in the slide in the top left. So it's sort of in the middle of the image. So dates for Jijibai are 1783 to 1859. Directly in line with Jijibai's statue, between two columns, was a standing figure of Sir John Malcolm's 1769 to 1833, governor of Bombay from 1827 to 1830, that you see to your right. Beyond this, the statue was the entrance to the central hall. Thus, the public space of the first floor of the north wing should be seen as two rectangular spaces divided by two columns. The larger rectangle contained the skylit stair in the center, whose corner niches held busts of various colonial officials. The smaller rectangular space contained the skylit statue of John Malcolm at its center, and additional statues were located in the corners. This section of the north wing would become the controversial site selected by native elites for the location of Shankar Shet's statue in 1871. Part 3, the Town Hall and the Elphinstone Circle Garden. Colin Cunningham, a scholar of the Victorian era, points to the significance of town halls to the developing townscape of Victorian and Edwardian Britain. Quote, each of these buildings designed to be both a focus and a showpiece for its town as well as a functional creation, end quote. With its Greek revival architecture and elevated main entrance, Bombay's town hall was certainly a showpiece for Bombay and located at a prominent site, framing the center of the fort, the nucleus of colonial settlement. In the 1860s, plans were afoot to transform the cotton green that fronted the town hall, to make this green into a public circle worthy of its opulent inhabitants and its status as a capital of the presidency. The commissioners suggested moving the green so as to center it with the line of Churchgate Street and the town hall, as you see in the image to your left. And the site was to be laid out in the manner prescribed by them, right? So they literally kind of moved it so that it would line up with the center of the town hall. This transformed green became the Elphinstone Circle that you see to your right and was Bombay's first major urban design scheme. Located in the heart of the fortified city between the native and European sections, the development formalized and beautified the most important public arena in the city. This was the, quote, old, dirty and dusty cotton green, end quote, that was surrounded by some of the most important institutions of the city, including the town hall, the St. Thomas Cathedral, and you can see this, the cathedral spire in the image to your right. So central to the impact of the scheme were the fort walls, which were pulled down as the circle rose from the ground. This destruction sounded the death knell of the old center, the green, as it opened up a new arena for public buildings along the Maidan, shifting the heart of the city outwards to a new frontier between the fort and the so-called native town. Part 4, the assertion of local elite control. Having just shown how the urban setting of the town hall was formalized in the 1860s, I would now like us to turn to the way in which Bombay's town hall was considered by the native public to belong to the public at large. The government permitted public meetings to be held in the town hall, hence making it a public space. The native public's belief in their ownership of the town hall is exemplified in the controversy that broke out in 1871 over the placement of the statue of the late Jagannath Shankar Shet, 1802 to 1865, in the building. Shankar Shet, a wealthy banker, was one of the most prominent citizens of Bombay. A Sonar by caste, he was long considered head of his own community as well as Bombay's Hindu community. The native elite's success in placing Shankar Shet's statue in the town hall was a victory for native elites and an assertion of local elite control over public buildings that were often constructed with their financial help. Shankar Shet's statue was voted by a public meeting of the inhabitants of Bombay held in the town hall on 12th March 1864, a year before his death. A letter from 1871 addressed to the government and signed by many prominent Chettiars, that is, heads of a caste or trading body distinguished by great wealth, announced the arrival of the statue and requested permission to erect it at a site they had selected. In their opinion, the best site for it was, quote, opposite to and facing the statue of the late worthy Baronet Sir Jamsetji Jijibhai at the entrance to the rooms of the Asiatic Society. end quote. According to them, this would not, quote, interfere with the arrangement of the room, but will fill the gap and adorn it with statues, end quote. The government issued instructions to select a site in the town hall for the statues, in response to which a report was submitted. The authors of the report received instructions from JACOM, who concluded that there was no suitable location in the town hall for the statue, for Shankar Sheth statue. In 1871, the two authors of the report proposed that if the government decided on placing the statue in the town hall, then the statue of Sir John Malcolm could be moved to another location, which is not located in the plan. In that case, the statue of Shankar Sheth could be placed in the position of that of Sir John Malcolm, facing, quote, his friend and contemporary, the first Sir Jamshedji Jijibai, end quote. Both Jijibai statue as well as Shankar Sheth statue were in the sitting position. The statue of Sir John Malcolm that you see to your right was standing and would, in their opinion, quote, balance admirably the statue of Sir Charles Forbes, end quote. And so at this point, Charles Forbes statue was still over here in the north wing. Even though, so the report indicated that it was possible to locate Shankar Sheth statue in the town hall, the government replied to Sir Jamshedji Jijibai, the second baronet, that is a son of the first baronet and others, that they were unable to agree to the placement of the statue at the selected site. And they offered no reasons. However, one might begin to glean the reasons from it by looking at the alternatives discussed above of placing Shankar Sheth's colossal statue between Malcolm's and Jijibai's statue, or in place of Malcolm's statue. Either alternative would have at once set up a relationship between the two colossal statues of native Shetiyas. Placed in a central position, these native Shetiyas would have dominated the space, making the colonial officials appear like subsidiary planets in a solar system dominated by these two suns, with Malcolm's statue either displaced or placed in an ambiguous position in line with them, right? So placing Jagannath Shankar Sheth statue over here facing Jijibai statue would have then would have set up a relationship. These are two big statues of the seated native elites, and all the other colonial officials would have actually appeared to be basically subsidiary to them. The Bombay Shetiyas remained undeterred by the government's refusal, and in 1872 requested the government's permission to place Shankar Sheth's statue in the recently completed Victoria and Albert Museum in Bombay that you see in the image. In a letter from 1872, the governor in council denied the Shetiyas' request that Shankar Sheth's statue be placed in the Victoria and Albert Museum because of the limited space available in that building. In response to this, Sir Jamshedji Jijibai, second baronet, wrote to one official and repeated his request that Shankar Sheth's statue be placed in, quote, some conspicuous building, end quote. Jijibai made some important arguments in his letter. First, that the native public had been the major subscribers to the museum, and the late Shankar Sheth, quote, was the chief source of the foundation of the Victoria Museum, end quote. Second, that the government's refusal was, quote, a very great reproach to the native community that the statue of one of their public-spirited townsmen is refused to be placed therein, end quote. A subsequent petition that year from Bombay's leading Shetiyas to the government reiterated that the statue had been raised by public subscription in honor of Shankar Sheth's public services. They also pointed out that the statue of, quote, one who has rendered long, faithful, and valuable service both to government and his country should be erected in some fit public building, end quote. The letter also reminded the government that Shankar Shet was one of the originators of the museum and that the public believed that his statue was entitled to a place in the building, quote, which owed its commencement in a great measure to his exertions and to the support of the public, end quote. Furthermore, the public expected the government to fulfill arrangements agreed upon at the public meeting. In other words, the argument by the Shetiyas was that Shankar Shet's public service, public opinion, and Shankar Shet's support and that of the public in the foundation of the museum meant that a place had to be found for his statue in a public building. A public building is a building owned by the state and housing a state institution. However, in the case of the town hall, public was interpreted by some as belonging to the public. The Parsi paper, the Rast Goftar of 31st March 1872, wondered why the governor had refused permission to house Shankar Shet's statue in the town hall of Victoria Gardens and asked whether the town hall belonged to the public. And if it did, had the public not a right to use it for whatever purposes it thought fit? The government was forced to consent to the erection of Shankar Shet's statue in a public building. They chose the town hall. In 1873, Shankar Shet's statue, and you see that image over here, was placed on the ground floor vestibule opposite the entrance to the north wing, where it still resides, as you see in the images. Why did the placement of the bust of Shankar Shet pose problems? The matter could simply have been one of size. The colossal statue of Shankar Shet was hard to accommodate. On the other hand, perhaps the issue was rather more political. At the time of the mutiny or First War of Independence in 1857, many prominent Indians were under suspicion for treason, and one of those secretly impeached was Shankar Shet. While many influential Englishmen considered him guilty, the governor, Lord Elphinstone, did not. Even though Shankar Shet's innocence had been proved, there may have been many Englishmen in the government who remained unconvinced. The struggle to locate Shankar Shet's statue in a public building was a claim made by a section of Bombay's native elite in the name of the public and in honor of Shankar Shet's public services. The town hall was a middle ground between the British and Indians. The British set the rules, and Indians believed that if they followed the rules, they would, over time, be given a greater voice in governance. As far as the British were concerned, they had no plans to cede control to the Indians. This is what Dipesh Chakravarti refers to as the waiting room version of history that was rejected by the nationalist elite. The importance of the town hall for Indian elites waned from the late 1890s. It was eclipsed by other institutions such as the municipal corporation in the 1860s and new ways of rallying public opinion, such as through public festivals by Bal Gangadhar Tilak in the 1890s and meetings held in a variety of spaces such as Madhav Bhag that you see to your right and the city's Maidans showed that it would be the unbound spaces in the city and a new way of conducting politics rather than contained institutional spaces such as the town hall that would become increasingly important in the 20th century. The town hall continued to be significant until 1918 and long after, but as the anti-colonial struggle changed in form from a relatively polite exchange in controlled environments to that of a mass movement with demonstrations and large public meetings in multiple venues, its significance declined dramatically. Part 4, some notes on the recent history of the town hall building. Today, the building known as the town hall is substantially under the charge of the Asiatic Society, whose name is painted atop the building. And so the name of the building contradicts the way it is sometimes referred to as the town hall. A newspaper article from 13th August 1996 highlighted the Asiatic Society's shock on seeing that its name was changed in the repainting of the town hall that precedes the Maharashtra state governor's annual at home in the building on Independence Day. The Asiatic Society of Bombay's name on the building, without prior consultation with its managing committee, was changed to the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, as according to one reporter, quote, an employee of the State Public Works Department took the government's renaming drive literally and asked the painter to change the name to Mumbai, end quote. Ironically, on 2nd August 1996, the managing committee of the society had proposed dropping Bombay from its name to call itself Asiatic Society. The name was changed from, the question is what's in a name, but a lot, it seems, even as this incident draws attention to the tangled history of authority, the users and users of this building, which is the subject of this talk. Since independence, the town hall building is strongly identified with the activities of the Asiatic Society of Bombay. In 1950, the government asked the Asiatic Society to take on the responsibility of a central library, which was to be funded by the state. In 1955, the Central Library was deemed to be a national depository library. The society thus came under the state with an expanded portfolio of duties. For various reasons, this partnership was not a success, and in 1976, the Nihar Ranjan Ray Committee recommended that the two part ways, which they did in 1994. While this process was still ongoing, according to sociologist Kamla Ganesh in 2008, quote, the sharing of space continues to pose difficulties for the society's own holdings, as also to the maintenance of the heritage structure and furniture and fixture, end quote. However, the society is, quote, now an autonomous trust reporting to the charity commissioner, end quote, with the ability to raise funds and run its activities on its own. Since the 1990s, corporate funding, grants from international agencies, and various fundraising activities have been conducted to deal with the society's financial crisis. To counter its failing membership, the public view of it as an exclusive domain, and also to counter the financial woes, the society has been forced to find creative ways to woo the public into the building. And I think this course is also a very creative way of wooing the public into this building, and I'm very glad for it. In order to understand the town hall building in its recent context, we need to move from the scale of the building to the city at large. What are the dominant shifts in attitude towards Indian cities since the 1980s and 1990s? How do these shifts in attitude relate to Bombay? How has the Asiatic Society adapted to the changing context in order to thrive? In terms of access, how public is the contemporary town hall building, and what are some of the publics it serves? In a famous essay, the well-known political scientist and theorist Partha Chatterjee raises the question, quote, are Indian cities becoming bourgeois at last, end quote. He highlights the dramatic shift, quote, in the ruling attitudes towards the big city in India, end quote, since the 1990s, when the image of a new post-industrial globalized metropolis began circulating and became influential, pointing to, quote, a surge in the activities and visibility of civil society. He notes, quote, everywhere the dominant cry seems to be to rid the city of encroachers and polluters, and as it were, to give the city back to its proper citizens, end quote. In brief, some of the major aspects of this new era are, according to Chatterjee, quote, first, active citizens groups who have lobbied to cleanse Indian cities, both its streets and lands, from squatters and encroachers, and to restore its, quote, public spaces for the use of proper citizens, end quote. Second, growing heritage and conservation movements for the preservation of pre-colonial and colonial buildings in a city. Third, an increase in, quote, segregated and protected spaces, end quote, for the exclusive use of elites. The case Chatterjee makes is pertinent to Bombay as well. In their popular urban history of Bombay, published in 1995, urban historians and conservationists Sharda Dwivedi and Rahul Mehrotra have argued that neither the government of Maharashtra, with its political leadership dependent on a rural power base and unable to take a visionary role, nor the private sector that, according to them, quote, lacks a moral conscience, end quote, seem to be able to tackle the problems of the city. Citizens groups and environmentalists emerged in the city since the 1980s to fill this lacuna. What was needed, they argued, quote, is a larger vision for the city, a view that gives meaning to all the smaller gestures that the various citizens groups are zealously attempting to make, end quote. The model of the new post-industrial globalized metropolis that gained traction in the 1990s might be seen as a larger vision for the city. Bombay's prominent heritage movement was one of the citizens groups that emerged in the 1980s. In April 1995, Bombay became the first city in India to develop heritage regulations by the Urban Development Department of the Government of Maharashtra. In 1996, members of the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry established Bombay First, an organization based on London First, with a similar goal of addressing the decline in economic growth of Mumbai. In mid-2003, Bombay First hired the consulting firm McKinsey & Company to analyze and make recommendations for the improvement of Mumbai. After the reports released in September 2013, Maharashtra Chief Minister Vilas Rao Deshmukh formed a task force to examine the, quote, feasibility of specific recommendations and created subcommittees to work on each of the issue areas, end quote. The Chief Minister's task force that was released in 2005 accepted many of the recommendations of the McKinsey's report, and through its own report announced its plans from transforming Mumbai into a world-class city within 10 years. On the left, you see a view of slums in Bombay, and on the right, the textile mills. Bombay, the birthplace of industrial capitalism, has seen industrial decline in the city, especially since the 1980s, and the subsequent transformation of mills to malls in former industrial districts. The former Phoenix Mills complex in Lower Parel that opened as High Street Phoenix in 1996 was one of the first mills to be redeveloped and includes a mall with various high-end shops, hotel, residential, and commercial areas. From the 1990s, the Slum Rehabilitation Authority has given investors the opportunity to raise slums and redevelop the land on the condition that they construct housing for displaced residents on a section of the site. In Bombay, the Fort Precinct, which houses a concentration of buildings from the colonial era, has been the focus of conservationists. Making the case that the Fort Precinct is an image center in Bombay, prominent architect and conservationist Rahul Mehrotra argued that, quote, image centers could put the identity of the city on hold till newer and perhaps more powerful ones emerge, end quote. Under the heritage regulations for Greater Bombay 1995, the fort is the largest of 8 conservation precincts with 14 sub-precincts, including Horniman Circle, but is referred to as Town Hall sub-precinct. Thus, in the parlance of those interested in the city's heritage, the Horniman Circle, formerly Elphinstone Circle, is now more strongly identified with the Town Hall to its east rather than the St. Thomas Cathedral to its west, both of which are the most dominant historical public buildings and institutions in its vicinity. The saving of Horniman Circle, I will take about another 10 minutes, I think. The saving of Horniman Circle fronting the town hall building and at the heart of the Fort District was an early victory for the emerging heritage movement. It was rescued from schemes hatched in the 1970s to convert it into a multi-story car park by the efforts of individuals like Sham Chainani, a founding member of the heritage movement, and B.K. Baman Behram, an important municipal corporator and former mayor. In 1986, the Tatars took the garden in the center of the circle in hand and generously restored it. It is in this context of the growing heritage movement that we found that the town hall building has once again acquired a great prominence in recent decades and is linked to the 0 point of the city. In the 1999 publication entitled Fort Walks, Vivedi and Mehrotra divide the Fort Precinct into 10 walks, with the first walk entitled Walking Around the Town Hall. Rather than starting their walks from north or south of the fort, they choose to start at the center, which for them appears to be the town hall. The guidebook draws attention to the front steps, which has a stone slab at its base with a 0 carved into its surface, referred to as the town hall datum level, which indicates that this point stands at nil height or sea level. The datum level relates in calibration to 52 other such benchmarks located all over the city. The Asiatic Society has actively sought to increase interest in the society through opening up its membership and also through capitalizing on the importance of the town hall building and its surrounding to the heritage movement in Bombay. During the Society's bicentenary year from 2003 to 2004, Ganesh was convener of the Committee for Asiatica, a walk through town hall, guided heritage walks on weekends for the public at large with activities in and near the town hall. A Times of India report on one event observed, quote, a young collegian tour guide was overheard telling his rapt visitors, when the Asiatic Society was formed in 1804, they did not admit Indians as members. Imagine a society formed to understand everything about Indians that did not even allow Indians entry, he declared, properly miffed, end quote. I can understand why he was so annoyed. In 1841, Sir Manekji Kursetji, whose statue in Baikala is known as Khara Parsi, I think I'm right about this, but I want to double check this point, was the first Indian to be admitted as member of the society. The case of the installation of the Shankar Sheth statue that I discussed earlier has a similar resonance. Both are effective and meaningful histories for their listeners as they remind them that their putative ancestors fought and won against the forces that said that none of this is for you. Questions of access are, of course, not only of historical interest, they're also always ongoing. The iconic town hall building has been featured in many feature films and advertising films, not necessarily as itself, but where the steps often substitute as an entranceway to fictional courts of justice of palatial mansions. The steps have been used and damaged in the process to stage action sequences for films, where various types of vehicles are driven at high speeds up the steps. Yet, as city historians and conservationist Rahul Mehrotra and Sharda Dwivedi pointed out, while permission is easily given to film producers, various authorities such as the police, the municipality, the collector's office, prevent citizens and tourists from photographing such monuments for their amateur records, end quote. I have to say that I have such experiences myself. In the description of an edited volume entitled 0 Point in and Around Horniman Circle, published in 2008, an Asiatic Society of Mumbai bicentenary project that emerged from Asiatica, the book jacket explains the title, quote, 0 Point from which all distances to the city are measured, is an apt metaphor for Horniman Circle. Located in the heart of Fort, it holds within itself the early history of the Portuguese and British presence going back to the mid-16th century. It is the very birthplace of Bombay. It is at the same time a hub of contemporary Mumbai, anchored in its economy and ethos, end quote. Further down this flap of this flap of the book jacket is another useful entry, 0 point from which distances to the city are measured. Bombay's 0 point used to be St. Thomas Cathedral in the Horniman Circle. It later on moved to the GPO. In other words, both the historical and existing 0 points of the city are rejected for a new one, the supposed birthplace of the city, its central pivot or axis mundi, so to speak. New regimes have often signaled their control over a city through practices of recentering. A good example of this is the marking of Tiananmen Square, the entrance to the imperial city of Beijing, as the new center of the capital of the incoming regime of the People's Republic of China in 1949, in preference to the old center in the Forbidden City. By rhetorically shifting the 0 point to Horniman Circle and inclined towards the town hall rather than St. Thomas Cathedral, through publications and practices of directed walks, conservationists and members of the Asiatic Society subtly recentered the city and in the process helped shape the way Bombay and its heritage are viewed by at least some members of its citizenry. They authored the creation of what I would call a meaningful history, not always accurate, but one that actively helps certain constituencies make a connection to it. I just want to I'm going to skip over a bit just to come to the last part of my talk. The state of Maharashtra still controls parts of the town hall, and one is especially reminded of this every year on Independence Day when the governor holds a reception for important dignitaries in the assembly room. Preparations for this annual event begin a fortnight earlier when the exterior and interior of the building are treated to a fresh coat of paint, and space for the reception is created in the central hall by removing the steel cupboards, furniture, card catalogs of the central library from this location. For the rest of the year, the central hall is the public reading room with standing desks in the daily newspaper section where mostly men, at least when I saw it, read papers while school children study at the tables, bringing large numbers of readers to the town hall daily. These are not wealthy or elite members of the public, but their right to this building is embodied for the bodily hexus of a person entitled to a space is different from those who know that none of this is for you. Thus, a grand space that once did and still does occasionally host events dominated by elites arguably caters to a much broader section of the local population on a daily basis than it did in the colonial era. If the town hall was a middle ground for Indians and the British in the colonial period, in the contemporary era, it functions as a middle ground for various classes, even if this has not come to pass by deliberate plan, and even though the interaction may be minimal. Cultural theorist Raymond William observed, quote, "I don't believe that the ordinary people, in fact, resemble the normal description of the masses, low and trivial in taste and habit. I put it another way, that there are in fact no masses, but only way of seeing people as masses," end quote. He added that in Britain, with industrialism came the breakdown of a social organization of personal relationships, making it easy to mass people we did not know. The culture of Bombay has been made by a history of shared public space, although these are contracting. Sharing space is also a kind of knowing, making it less easy to see people simply as masses. I end with a scene from the steps of the town hall building at twilight. Observers have noted how school children gather here to use the light to study from their books. I witnessed a similar sight at another location, the Bai Sakarbai Dinshaw Petit Hospital for Animals, and you see an image to your right. This is opened in 1882 to 1884. For all of us who care about learning, this is a moving experience. Architectural historian and theorist Del Upton tells us that, quote, extraordinary places are not necessarily monumental buildings. Instead, extraordinary places are those liminal spaces where there is slippage, where unusual or unlikely or disapproved events might take place because the space was not carefully enough designed or powerful or persuasive enough to discourage unorthodox behavior, end quote. Both the town hall and the Petit Hospital for Animals are architecturally compelling. However, they are made into extraordinary places by these school children who found those liminal spaces where there are slippages to partake in their light and space. And I would say that the managers of the Dinsha Petit Hospital were actually very, very open to the school children. It was actually really very, very moving to see that. So there are these are made into extraordinary places by these school children who found those liminal spaces where there are slippages, quote, to partake in their light and space, who study and imagine futures of possibility by refusing to accept that none of this is for you. They reject the idea that these public buildings are not meant for them. In doing so, they show us that they too dream of taking their place as adults, as right-bearing citizens, and not simply as populations. Thank you very much for your patience, and thank you very much for listening to me. I think we have time for questions now.
Thank you, Dr. Chopra. It was really very nice of you to have continued with the talk and to be even open to the question answer session. I hope you're feeling all right.
Yeah, I'm feeling good, thanks.
Okay, so we are now open for the QA. There are 4 questions in the chat box.
Okay, let me go to the chat box. Okay. Venkatesh has a great question, and I can't answer it, but I'm going to raise it because it's such a great question. And he asked whether to tell us about some events related to any freedom struggle meetings here. And I think that's a great question. I kind of remember some story about Jinnah's wife bringing ham sandwiches, and I think that might have been here. It's one of those things which is a kind of a task I certainly need to do, which means actually sitting and looking at a whole bunch of reports on native papers and actually recording this. But that's an excellent question about some, what events during the freedom struggle took place here. Thank you for your question. Okay. Rohan Navalkar has asked a question. This is to everybody, so I'm going to read it out and maybe someone else could answer the question. Are there any issues the building is facing considering the century plus of monsoons it has faced? And where can I get more information regarding the controversy over the placement of Jagannath Shankar Sheth? Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. Thank you, Rohan, for your questions. I think this issue of monsoons and how to protect buildings in Bombay is so critical. I can't answer that, someone else can. I have published an article on the town hall and this controversy in a book on on global town halls, and I can share that reference with the conveners of your class. It's also actually brought up in a very good biography, and I can't remember the name of Shankar Sheth. So of Jagannath Shankar Sheth, it's also found there. I actually refer to the records in the archives. Would anyone want to say anything about the monsoon? Someone who has. Okay.
Participants, please mute yourselves. Please mute yourselves.
Okay. Johnson Oracle, thank you very much. You also want to know about an article, and it will be good learning value of RM in history and heritage. So not actually all of this is published. The part of the controversy is published in that in the journal art in the article in this book, which I will share with your course organizers. Actually, it's a very good book on town halls. Since I started working on the town hall, I've actually been really surprised that, you know, I just never thought about this institution, but it actually functions quite differently in different places, and one's interaction is very different. So I will share that, but if you ever get a chance to look at the book, that would also be really a very good. It's got articles on chapters on different town halls. As I said, that the contemporary stuff, this is not published. I also have another a chapter which is supposed to, which is about actually Friendship and Charles Forbes statue in the town hall. And so that one is actually kind of stuck in this publication process. But that also talks about the town hall and statues. Okay, Chaitrali Kelkar to everyone. Would you please tell us more about how the town hall contributed to city within challenging context? I guess that my presentation has been about this. A building like this has, you know, in the beginning, it faced challenges of, let's say, funding, right? And so it overcame certain kinds of challenges to become a certain kind of place. And which had all these different functions. Now we see that, like, it was actually extremely well used for the longest time, right? In fact, in the post-independence era, it may have faced many more challenges, because you have to think about maintenance of this building. The Asiatic Society itself has faced challenges of funding, right? So both the maintenance, also like the use of the Asiatic Society libraries, all of these things actually are challenges that the building and the institution it houses has faced. And also, as you see, that Bombay's really expanded in size, right? And in some ways, it's also like how much are people, how central is a place like the town hall, or this building anymore? So all of these factors play a role. In fact, you could probably yourself answer some of these questions as to, like, how convenient do you find it to come over here, for example? Oh, thank you, Rama Bishnoi, very much for your comments. Chaitali Kulkarni has asked, have any architectural elements of the town hall changed over time? I'm afraid I can't answer the question, but there's been a lot of work which is like heritage restoration, and whether it's been exactly the same or changes have happened, I can't say. But buildings are very dynamic and they change over time. And unless you really have records which can tell you, it's really impossible to say. I myself really had to sort of dig out these drawings. It was with great difficulty that I had them photographed and then redrawn. So, you know, it's an excellent question, and it might be that one of the projects someone undertakes is to actually measure draw all of these buildings, which gives a kind of a base point so that you can then actually map changes over time. Nitisha, to everyone, is the inscription still present on the step of the Asiatic Society? I assume it is, but can someone else answer this? Another really good question. Ah, yes. R. Venkatesh is also answering. Rohan, the building has been restored by famous conservation architect Abha and is well secured from nature's vagaries. Yes, there's some really beautiful photographs of its restoration. And I think that she also recently restored the municipal hall as well, really beautifully. Omkar Salonke has asked, good evening, could you tell us a bit more about the one second. Ankur, there was a sea level marker, right? So that is on the Asiatic steps, that is actually like level 0, and there are 52 other markings, which at what the level is in terms of compared to the sea level. Over here, it's at its 0. So they're trying to get a sense of how much above sea level different points in the city are. Omkar Salonke says, good evening. Could you tell us a bit more about the previous town halls before this town hall was constructed? How were they used? Did they have any public assembly spaces? As far as I remember, they did not have the public assembly spaces. Sometimes you just get sort of like information about how it was linked to the courts of justice, how it was in rented buildings, but you really get a sense of a clear need for a public assembly space in 1811. Some of this may be in my article, but also some of this could be in the gazetteers as well. Ujjwal Gurdaswamy, to everyone, since 1991, as the Indian state adopted neoliberal economic reforms, where cities are considered to be an engine of growth, could you reflect upon the importance of having a space like a town hall in a congested city for Mumbai for public good, non-exclusive and non-rivalry nature? That's a great question, Ujjwal. I think spaces like the town hall and institutions like the Asiatic Society are gems. You know, I really encourage you to become members of it. It's got great resources. You can also subscribe to the online resources, but make use of the space. I mean, I actually loved going and just sitting over there and being around those statues, for example. That reading room is a delight. It just takes you back to a different era. It is also so nice to see people standing, reading papers. It's a place of calm. I also just actually like to go and sit in St. Thomas Cathedral just for the calm and the quiet, because there is so much of this, as you said, like a congested city. So these spaces, but these institutions are really important. I also think that, you know, spaces like the Asiatic Society, this is so many people are keeping things together through voluntary work or through labor of love. It's very, very difficult to have a place like this. I was just talking to a friend in Delhi saying like how I really wish that we could make some public libraries in Delhi, maybe colony libraries, but also a big public library for people to come, you know, place of calm, maybe with some extra facilities. And something like learning is not about money. And there has to be something which is away from this new liberal thing, agenda, which is really just about commerce, right? Which is about the primacy of financial incentives. And I think that when you are in a place like this, in an institution like this, and also the very fact that you're coming to learn about the city, this puts you in a different mindset, and it, I think, helps to at least you know, change the course of the city in a way. Protect the space of the Asiatic Society and other buildings like that. Protect the institution also. Public public-private partnership as a way forward. All right, this is also Ujjwal's question. Good question. Right. So so Venkatesh answered your question that it's the public Central State Library is open to all Monday to Saturday, and it's completely public. But there may be certain things which have got private help. My own work, joint enterprise, has actually talked about how native elites were very much involved in founding many institutions in Bombay. So even when we talk about the museum at Victoria Gardens, there too native elites played a role. And overall, when you think of the British came as colonizers. I mean, they came as an East India Company. Later on, the Crown took over, but they were here to make a profit. They actually were very reluctant to construct. So a lot of the buildings, especially those that had to do had something to do with the welfare of the public, was constructed through partnerships with philanthropists. Now you are also seeing sometimes certain kinds of partnerships, possibly in preservation as well. But some of the others might know more about this. Chaitali Kulkarni has asked, what have been some of the most useful resources for this project? Various sources. So the archives, which you're going to visit, that's been a very central resource. Secondary literature, you will find that the gazetteers, etc., are something that you're going to constantly refer to. Secondary also sources on Bombay. Also, basically a lot of thinkers, right? So for example, I did a course, I attended a course which was on the public, and we read Habermas, for example. So you really have to start thinking about issues of the public. If I hadn't, I really wouldn't have possibly been so sensitive to this issue of the public, or the very fact that there might be multiple publics. So I would say that theory, and so you've heard some theoretical or other insights coming from Habermas, who I've referred to, Partha Chatterjee, also Del Upton, Raymond Williams, that also influences. And another thing which was really important was that I was basically asked to participate in a project, on this book project, as a contributor on the Bombay Town Hall, since I work on Bombay. And I'd never thought about the town hall. Like, what is a town hall? I just never thought about it. I just took it for granted. And just that was actually very important, having to ask the question and then realizing like, oh, it's doing this and that. And now when I go elsewhere, I really pay attention. Like, I'm amazed in France, all like villages of a certain size, all of them have a town hall. All of those villages have a town hall. They have a mayor. They have, like, if you have to, so that they deal with various things, like maybe say water supply or some other thing, or sewage or whatever. But also if you have to make any change to the house. So that the town hall is a prominent building, the Marie it's called, right? And you as a citizen actually have a very active relationship. And this made me really start thinking, what is my relationship to a town hall? Where have I had a relationship to the town hall? And I kind of think that, oh yes, when I went to the Netherlands, I had to bring in all my documents and I had to register. That's when I had a relationship to the town hall. So another big influence was really like looking at this and then saying, oh, what is it? And what is this institution, the town hall? And realizing that the town hall in the colonial context in Bombay and, similarly in other parts of India, is completely different from the town hall in Britain or some other place. Are there any other examples of architecture? Soumya has asked, are there any other examples of architectural spaces that helped the Indian locals to claim more public ownership of spaces like in the case of the town hall? Well, in this, you see the museum at Victoria Gardens was another place that the elites were claiming ownership of. So that's also actually another example. But there was a lot of battle over public spaces. So you see a lot of battle over public spaces, whether it was like school children playing cricket and British elites. There was a battle over the public spaces of Bombay too. Kavita has asked, could you explain the various activities, functions of the assembly rooms of the town hall? Did it also offer a site of social interaction within the various classes within the British inhabitants of Bombay? Good question, Kavita. As I said, I would have to make a long list of all the various activities at some point. I'm not really sure that it would be really with all the various classes within British inhabitants. Keep in mind that half of there weren't that many European inhabitants in India, and about half of them were poor whites. They were seen as very inferior, and I think that unless I have, of course, something more concrete, I can't say for sure, but I think that they would certainly not necessarily invite them to the town hall. The British were quite careful to actually manage their poor because they were an embarrassment. So I don't know about all the various classes, and sometimes this is the trouble that I'd love to have information like this. I would love to be able to answer your question more concretely, but sometimes we don't really get all this detail. Jolly Shankar, what factor made you choose town hall as a subject for research? I sort of think I've answered that. It came as this part of this project, which is this edited volume on town halls, and that's how I got into it in more detail. Venkatesh, thank you very much. Very much for your kind words about my book, and also thank you for your comments on the Suburbs article. That sounds like you have read it, and I'm really thrilled. Daisy, like the town hall, was there any thought given to having a city square? Yes, the Horniman Circle, or the so-called Cotton Green, the Elphinstone Circle, that was actually transformed. So yes. I think I've answered. Wonderful questions. You're a fantastic group. This is going to be a really fantastic and lively class, I can see.
Any more questions, participants? Since there are none, I guess we can wind up the session. And I would like to thank Dr. Chopra once again for having accepted our invitation. And I think gauging from the number of questions and the quality of the questions, I think our session was a great success. So thank you once again. And before I end, I would also like to give a big thanks to our wonderful participants. I think the course is because of you. And I hope that you will continue to participate this enthusiastically throughout. We end our course on the 26th, and I hope that we'll see the same type of QA that we are witnessing just now for this session. And also a big thank you to Shehnaz, who is the Jaan of MRC. Without her, nothing is possible. And of course, the tremendous efforts put in by Louisa and Ramesh behind the scenes. Just a few announcements before we leave. That sessions hereafter will be conducted from 6:30 to 8:30. So there'll be 2-hour sessions, and the QA will be in the last half an hour. And I would request all of you to log in with your names. Don't log in with 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever, just the alphabets. It is only for the sake of safety that we insist that all of you log in with your names. So that is that for today. And with this, we end. Thank you once again, all of you.
Thank you and goodbye, and have a wonderful course. And you're a great group and you have fabulous leaders. Thank you.
Thank you.